Dames en here, goeiemôre. My naam is Jan Sarabi. Ek is Agri SA's hoof van natuurlike hulpbronne en wetgewing beleid uitvoerende beampte by die organisasie. Welkom by vanoggend se webinar oor mynbou en landbou, mining and agriculture, quo vadis, where are we going to, waarheen gaan ons heen? Agri SA het al 'n geruime tyd is ons bewus van die druk. Natuurlik is dit 'n ooglopende druk wat bestaan tussen die landbousektor en die mynbousektor in Suid-Afrika. Die organisasie se posisie daarom is ondersteunend van aard. Meeste van die werksaamhede word uitgevoer op provinsiale vlak deur ons provinsiale affiliate. Tog vind ons in Suid-Afrika dat daar toenemend druk is uit die mynbousektor rondom die voortbestaan en volhoubaarheid van die landbousektor. En die twee sektore is saam leef in verbintenis tot mekaar in die land se groter ekonomie en doelstellings. Vanweë die herhaalde versoeke daaraan aan Agri SA het ons dit goed gevind om 'n meer gefokuste projek en werksaamhede te begin loods rondom hierdie uitdagings wat ons vind. Die mynbousektor is natuurlik self onder druk, maar daar is 'n aantal faktore wat mense in Suid-Afrika moet bekommerd maak, veral uit 'n regerings- en 'n bestuursoogpunt uit rondom hoe mynbou in Suid-Afrika plaasvind. Ons is ook uiters bewus of bewus van die feit dat olie en gas geweldige ontwikkelingsdruk het in Suid-Afrika en uitlatings deur ons leierskap in die land maak mense bekommerd hieroor. Ons is baie bevoorreg om vanoggend vir professor Truter met ons te hê. Ek het my Afrikaans nou so 'n bietjie of geleentheid om Afrikaans te praat, het ek nog gebruik soveel as wat ek moet. Is self 'n boerseun, as ek dit so mag sê. Julle sal gesien het uit sy CV uit, ek dink nie daar's 'n meer gekwalifiseerde en meer kundige persoon om te praat oor die onderwerp waar ons vanoggend gaan gesels nie. We'll be talking about the coexistence between mining and agriculture, and we look forward to hearing from you. Wayne has been a friend, I think is correct or appropriate to say, for as long as I've been with Agri SA, and certainly struck me from the first time we met with his knowledge about the sector, agriculture, but as well as mining, and also the challenges. We look forward to listening to you today. And Wayne, I'm not going to repeat your CV. You might tell us a little bit more about what you're busy with and what you're doing. It's a very comprehensive one and certainly intimidates most people who read it, but certainly an indication of your experience, your qualification, also your passion for the topic. With that, and we only have an hour today, I thought I'd spend a bit more time on the introduction, but like Jack Norris, I don't wear a watch. I determine what time it is. So we only have an hour today. I'm looking forward to. We're all looking forward to hearing from you, colleagues who are joining us online. This is the first of a series of webinars about the topic. There's a lot to be said about mining and agriculture, and we'll certainly be pursuing this matter and the interest in this in future engagements and ongoing engagements in the future. I'm going to give Wayne the floor now. We're going to have an opportunity at the end of his presentations for questions and answers, and I'll then conclude with a little bit more about what Agri SA will be doing in this space of mining and agriculture when we get to the end of the presentation this morning. With that, Wayne, we're looking forward to hearing from you. We thank you in advance. Thank you for your time this morning in particular. The floor is yours.
Baie dankie Jan, goeiemôre dames en here. Dankie vir die voorreg om vanoggend bietjie met julle te gaan gesels oor van die werk wat ons nou al die afgelope ruk al gedoen het. En soos Jan gesê het, ek is 'n boerseun daar uit in Mpumalanga uit, groot geword op Delmas, boer nog steeds daar op Delmas. So verstaan redelik baie die druk van mynbou op landbou in die spesifieke gebied. Ek wil net gou my aanbieding net met julle deel. Ek glo julle sal dit nou alles kan sien. Maar ja, daar's baie om te sê, and I'm going to switch over to English now just to obviously make sure that I get to all the technical information correctly. But there's a lot to be said about mining and agriculture. And a lot is going on in the space, two very important sectors. And I've currently been involved in the last 25 years in trying to reinstate agricultural production systems in rehabilitated mining landscapes. And there's been some really exciting developments and exciting outcomes, but at the same time, it remains probably one of the most challenging integrated disciplines that you find. Now, land rehabilitation, there's so many different aspects of it. You know, we speak about restoration, reclamation, remediation, and something that we lately use is regeneration. So it's taking a disturbed landscape and trying to make the most of it. But now these two sectors are side by side, and you know, we've been tasked with many different research projects over the years to try and see how we can make a difference, how we can try and support the mining industry. And their core business is mining. It's not agriculture. And you know, so it is always challenging to try and get across what is required from agriculture when they do the rehabilitation. And some of the mining companies do a really explicit job. You know, they really do a really good job because they get a lot of pressure internationally because of their shareholders. But we always have the concerns of the smaller groups, the smaller ones that don't have the pressure. But needless to say, this is just an opportunity that these big companies have to showcase what potentially can be done. But at the end of the day, we don't know what's really going on in the rehab space. I know a lot of the farmers that I work with, a lot of my colleagues, the question always arises, but you know, what is the potential of the land post rehabilitation? And this is something that we have been asking a long time now. It's a question that always comes up. And we embarked on this project that is sort of supported and it exists because of an MAU between you know, Agri SA and the Minerals Council. And we thought it's best to just get a little bit of an understanding of what is actually going on with these two sectors in the country. And there's many different mining commodities. They all have different impacts on the land. And we need to just take stock before we can actually go and make recommendations, even though recommendations are being made to the best of their potential. But there's some really failed recommendations I've seen in the past. Like, you know, I always like to use the example of, you know, some mining companies come with this wild idea of planting blueberries on a rehabilitated piece of land. And then firstly, well, that's not going to really function in that particular area and does not necessarily, you know, tailor and sort of fit into what is actually going on in the regional landscape. So they're always faced with these challenges. So we said, come, let's do this project. Let's understand what's going on. Let's understand how much land is actually being rehabilitated, and try and get an understanding what the potential is. I myself have leased land back from mines for my cattle, and I leased it back because I knew what actually happened in the rehabilitation, and I was astonished with what I've achieved on that particular land. So I speak from experience as well, but I also know that there is a lot of cases where this might not necessarily be the case, and we need to help and support these kind of industries if we want to get the most out of this land. All right, that's a long introduction to where I've been. I'm not going to talk about my academic career and where I come from, but I think there's enough being said. But I'd like to share with you what this project has actually been about. It's been running for 3 years, going in its 4th year now. And what have we done? What have we tried to achieve? What are we achieving? Where are we going with this? And what can potentially come from it? Right, let's get going. Okay, so MinAgri platform, information platform, this is the name of the project. It's basically looking at mining and agriculture coexistence. This is a project that was done between myself and Gerrit van den Berg from IVIS, his group, my team and his team, you know, sort of trying to collate all the information, making sense of the information. And, you know, you can get a whole bunch of information and data, but if you don't interpret it into the correct context, it means absolutely nothing. So we came up with this information platform. We also decided that we have to have a live online system because, you know, this data is constantly evolving. It's dynamic, it's changing. There's always new land coming on board, you know, that's being rehabilitated. So this platform provides the opportunity for the two sectors to get an understanding of what's going on. And, you know, if a mine wants to rehabilitate, what does it rehabilitate to? What should it be looking at in that particular region? What should it be trying to achieve? Then on the same hand, in the agricultural space, what potential of land is actually coming back to the sector? Is there potential? You know, what is the risks involved in trying to utilize this land? What other risks are there that we are not aware of, or can potentially become aware of? And these are this is what this platform is trying to actually do, is trying to do that. I don't think this project will ever end. I think it will always continue. It will always evolve, and more data will be made available. And obviously with technology and digital monitoring nowadays, these systems are built to be able to handle large amounts of data, and at the same time do a lot of analytics, a lot of interpretation, and a sort of consolidated database of information. So the project background, you know, these are typical landscapes that we face, and I'm going to use various different options. There's many different mining enterprises. There's coal, there's gold, there's underground, there's surface, there's pit mining. Each of them are different approaches. There's different many mining methods. They're all different according to the different climates in which they are functioning in. So there's a lot, and it also changes the way rehabilitation is also going to take place. So when we look at this kind of landscape, we think to ourselves, how are these two ever going to coexist? You know, this looks like a mess on the right-hand side of my screen, and we sit with this functional landscape that we need to also produce food. And how can we blend these two? Is there opportunity? What can these two function, and how can they function together? And when you look at what's happening in the mining side of the road, it looks, you know, they move mountains. It looks so, well, it is so destructive. It's, you know, it's so intense. It's really a mess if you think about it, because it's just all over the place. And with the right methodologies and protocols and standards and norms, some good potential can be reclaimed. And I think that's what's really important with these kind of projects, is that we try and determine what these potentials are. I always like to refer to that, you know, we are creating specialized agricultural situations. You know, return of soil, placement of soil. Very often there's a blending of soil. We're creating our own new soil. The whole hydrological functioning is different. You know, there's many different things that change because you're recreating an environment. And now when you place the soil on top, it all looks natural, but the functioning is different. And we need to understand this so that when we utilize this land, that we know, and so from the mining's perspective, very important that whatever we use that land for doesn't have further environmental liabilities and doesn't have a further impact downstream. So they're always very concerned in what they plan to do with the land post-rehabilitation. And obviously there's so many checks and balances. They are really monitored to the T, or they are supposed to be monitored to the T. And again, I think the bigger international companies are under more pressure because they've got a lot more environmental audits, a lot of enforcement, a lot of internal stuff going on. But then you also sit with other situations where this is not the case, and can be very often concerning. So we have to understand where are these different scenarios that we have to face. There have been some really good experience or sort of projects where they've attempted to try and reinstate certain arable land capability classes, trying to plant back maize, you know, on these rehabilitated spaces. These are not always as easy as it sounds. And I think very often mining companies, environmental, you know, the departments or rehabilitation, mine closure departments, really find that this is not as easy as it sounds. It's, you know, you can mess everything up, but try and put it all back again. It doesn't function the same. And it's a period of time that I've seen of projects that I started back 25 years ago, only now are starting to show signs of potential for a specific land capability class. Other land capabilities, potential is reached within 5 to 10 years. So it depends on what the end land use is going to be in that specific space. But where do we capture these examples? Where do we capture this data so that it can inform others that are actually trying to attempt to do the same thing, just to make it easier? There's always been this discussion of, coming back to using this land, and probably, myself coming from Mpumalanga, some parts of Northwest, some parts of the Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo even, there are some surface mines that by default are going to return back to, through their rehabilitation practices, the first thing they do is they oversee these rehabilitated landscapes with pastures. And very often that's the first phase of revegetation and reclamation and regeneration, depending on what specifically you're looking at. But by default, a lot of this land is destined for livestock production to some extent. And that's what very often what is starting to they think about. And when you think about land regeneration, the livestock or the animal factor is an extremely important component of rehabilitation, regeneration of the land. And we see this even in the agricultural sector, regenerative agriculture, regenerative grazing. But yet again, we sit with a very unstable resource that, you think about it, you've taken out all the soil, put it all back, you've lost structure, you've lost very often fertility if it's not done properly, you've lost a lot of things. Now you're going to recreate that. And you're going to start with vegetation. You're going to start with, obviously, soil amendment, soil amelioration, fertilization, to try and get it to some point so that the vegetation can survive. And then you catalyze the system by adding the animal factor. I like to use the word catalyzing with using cattle. But this is, by default, very often in the large surface mining environments, a default land use. But yet again, there's still other land uses that potentially can also feature and do really well. I'm not even talking about the bioenergy sector. There's a lot of land available there to produce plants and to grow plants that can tolerate these slightly difficult environments that are created initially through rehabilitation. There's many other examples I can give you that I've seen that have been tested and show potential. And I think what's important from us, from an agricultural perspective, is to try and see how we can harness the potential and how we can actually justify the economic value of it. Because I sometimes think that you cannot compare it 100% with what normal agriculture is all about. Yet again, there is still a liability onus on the mining environment, and the economics could slightly change because there's still this commitment to, sort of look after liability. This is just some of my own thinking around this whole topic that I've seen going forward. Anyway, so we're dealing with very complex agro-ecosystems that we are creating through rehabilitation. It's a diversified land management system. There's many different features. The landscape changes. The species diversity changes. There's a lot of genetic diversity. The whole production of plants changes. Nutrient cycling is different. The soil cover function is also difficult and different. And we have to now take these features and we're going to try and create some kind of functional biodiversity. And then there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the sense, and I think it's easier when you understand the agricultural principles, it's easier to be able to do this. And I see this time and again with all the environmental officers and rehabilitation specialists that I've worked with in the past for the different mining companies. Very often you can immediately see that really good rehab is being done by somebody who's got some kind of agricultural background. It's really been interesting in the last couple of years to be able to see this. So there's this huge requirement for this knowledge to be able to understand these environments, because we're putting a puzzle together again. But if you don't understand how these different interrelationships function, then it's going to be really challenging to understand why this is not growing, why the soil's doing this and that. Doing this, we have to create these different services. And I'm not going to go into all that detail there, but we're trying to rebuild a system that can support plant production and eventually livestock production, food production, all the different types. So that's just a little bit of technical background. This is just some information on all the different entities that we've sort of made contact with in the past to try and introduce the project. We've had better buy-in from others. We obviously got a lot of people in the Minerals Council, all their members, because this platform is really important to them because they don't really understand much of what is required from agriculture. I think from agriculture's perspective, it's just trying to understand where's all our land going, how much of it has got potential. And at this point, I can say to you that, and that's something that we're picking up by collecting data, and I think we've known this for quite some time, is that mines own significant portions of land, but they don't necessarily mine it all. So there's a whole portion of land that is, because they're not using it, if it's not leased back to farmers, there's some land there that is actually naturally degrading as well and losing potential. It'll be easier to reclaim it or regenerate it than it is where we sit now with a whole completely upside turned down profile and soil and environment, and now try and recreate it. So these are the different things that we try to capture, to try to say, well, okay, you own all this land, and because this is what the data show, there's a lot of land owned by mines, but how much of it is really being used? What is the value there? And if you think about the whole Mine Health and Safety Act in which these mining companies have to abide, there's very often a lot of sort of worry from a mine manager perspective of what actually goes on in his mine. Because if somebody gets hurt or killed or whatever, he's liable in his personal capacity. And this is sometimes a large restriction on being able to utilize the land. So I think these are conversations, and I think there's a lot that still needs to be done, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to be able to have good relationships with these mining companies so that one could potentially utilize the land that is not being mined, and obviously with outside the mining environment, because that is quite a unsafe environment if you're not fully compliant to what they require to be able to function in that. But nevertheless, that is also why they don't want anything else happening on the land. Be that as it may, there's many different enterprises, many different industries, government departments, different research institutions that we've been contacting and discussing. Even the banking environment, which has also been very important because they need to understand this information if they want to fund projects. They want to understand the risks and so forth. So when we look at just how this platform has been put together, the different phases, we started off with the knowledge base, the data source, static image mapping. We then further took this data and we went and did a sort of a higher level comparison. We created interactive fact sheets and mapping. And I'll just show you, maybe, I'm not going to run through the system because it's quite a large system. And I think over the teams, it's going to be a little bit slow, but I'll just show you some snapshots of how the system works and how it sort of helps inform. Then the last phase of the project, which we're sort of entering into now, there's a lot of toolkit capabilities. So you can do some comparative parameter calculations just to be able to see, what is the potential of this land if we continue to manage it in a specific way, if the climate changes, if we have different rainfall events, all that sort of typical crop modeling, but within the context of this disturbed environment. And then obviously automated reporting, which sort of supports them in the sense that they understand that, their regeneration or rehabilitation program is actually making a difference. So we've got some project contributors. We've had some big mining companies that have actually shared their data with us, just telling us how much land they've got, how much has been rehabilitated, revegetated. It was a lot of data we got. We had to package it. There's a lot of confidentiality and sort of agreements in place. And I'll explain the system now is that how the public will see this data. They don't see the detail. The public can't see the detail. We as an executive data management team sees the detail because it's a service we support the mining environment in. But at the same time, we aggregate the data to be able to portray what is actually changing in the environment so that neighbors or anybody who's interested in what's happening can actually see, and this is the sort of the vision, is that it can actually see what's actually coming back and what the potential is of the rehabilitated land. So we've got a couple of big mining companies that actually we've spent a lot of time with trying to get the data, and now that they actually see what the platform's actually doing for them, because obviously being members of Minerals Council, it helps them. They can use the system to actually import their data, and it helps them to get a little bit of a better snapshot of, are they achieving their targets? But it takes a lot of time to collect this data, incorporate it, clean it up. And that's what this project was all about, is trying to just take the data, make something of it. So we try to build this knowledge base. It's quite a comprehensive knowledge base, as you can imagine. There's many different aspects that actually make whatever you present very valuable. There's many different derivatives from this information. What can we actually derive from these data sets? Are we improving land potential? Is there an opportunity to increase yields? Are we going to optimize these reclaimed footprints? Will this new agricultural potential tie into our existing agricultural potential or production systems in a particular area? And then obviously trying to monitor the progress of rehabilitation. I think that's the most important, is that it's not being done slapdash, so that people can see that there is efforts being made. And where no efforts are being made, just to be able to say, well, this is where we need to go and sort of concentrate on. We need to go and see what's going on there. We need to understand what's going on there. So this project's taken time. It's obviously developed. There's a couple of deliverables. You can go and look on the information platform yourself. You have access to it. I'll share the link with you now, and you can go and look at some of the public available data. We've taken all data that is available from Department of Agriculture, Department of Mineral Resources, all the different data sets that are publicly made out available because of many years of research and projects. We've taken that data and we've also incorporated it into the system, so that if a mine is loading up his data, he can obviously benchmark what he's achieving to what is actually happening in the environment or in that particular area. Based on regional data that has been collected over the years by other government departments, other research institutions that make it public available. Our focus initially was on land. There is obviously a huge concern about water, and with time, there's a lot of work being done by CSIR and many other institutions on water, even the Water Research Commission. And we eventually hope that this data can also be incorporated. We've incorporated some water data. We haven't incorporated the mine's water data at this point yet, because we're still just trying to understand the land issue and the potential and the agricultural potential there. But like I said, we've collected a lot of spatial information, incorporated into the system, and to be able to show and portray what is actually going on there. So these capturing and presenting the data is quite difficult, because each different mining house collects their data in a specific way. The environmental consultants do audits in different ways that use different methodologies. So it's quite a challenge, and our entire team sits and basically has to sort of convert data, make sure that we can incorporate the data into this GIS system, with a spatial monitoring system and information platform. And then we are able to then go and overlay all this data to be able to see, where is agriculture taking place? Where is there a lot of irrigated agriculture? Where is there a lot of surface coal mining happening? Where are quarries? Where are open pits? Things like this, just so that one can get an understanding. And then with time, what is hopefully going to be coming on board, and we will probably start releasing the first lot of data soon, is where the mines that have actually rehabilitated land, that rehabilitated land will now also show up with a particular potential to be able to, obviously look forward to. So the key approaches to this project was obviously to acquire all this data. We needed dedicated people to, sort of clean and integrate this data from all the different participants. We have different levels of access to the data, obviously, because of confidentiality. But the Minerals Council, Agri SA, the participants have a certain, they can only look at their data in the context of public data. And we have access to all the data to be able to consolidate it all and to integrate it so that we can get an aggregated version to be able to show what's happening spatially. So as you can see, it's quite complex in a sense. Phase 3, we're moving into. This is the kind of data that is coming out. We can see how much land is owned. We can see how much land is rehabilitated, how much is closed, how much is actively being mined, what is the different land cover for the different mining groups or for the province or for the region. I'll show you now. What is the agricultural land capability for all these different mining groups? This is now obviously just a summary of everything. What is the rainfall in that specific environment? Are there any protected areas in that area? which is really important. So this is the kind of information that we try and look at. What's important now is for future use for the mining environment is to be able to identify different aspects that shows opportunity for coexistence. How can this inform rehabilitation practices that end land uses? In the past, they just used to look at an EIA, look at an ENP, and then just do what the ENP says. And that's obviously the legislation requires that. To what extent that is achieved is what's obviously monitored over time. But we've seen with time that you can't make everything the same as what it was in the past. There's very often challenges there. So one has to consider other alternative land uses, and I think this is something that's starting to become really important in the rehabilitation space, is that we did not one size does not fit all, and you have to try and make use of the best. You've got to make sure that the minimum standard is complied to. That is the most important, and there are still challenges around it. So we hope that methodologies can change and then obviously support the rehabilitation process. There's a lot of data and recommendations that can be made from this kind of system. Just looking at grazing capacity, for instance, one that I work a lot with when it looks at livestock production. We know what the public data is, what they say. We try and incorporate it. We do know at ground level it's very often different. But when we benchmark against long-term data, it just gives us an indication. And I can tell you now, I've seen some really good rehabilitated land that grazing capacities that you cannot believe. I haven't even seen them on my own farm that well. But thinking about the fertilizer budgets that some of these mines have, I can see why I'm obtaining good biomass, good grazing capacity, and things like that. So we've come up with some baseline crop and growth requirements and information for the mines, just to be able to inform them. Very often, which is very challenging for rehabilitation specialists, is that the only set of norms and standards they have is the agricultural data and norms and standards, which is not, it's good data, it's good information, it's good guidelines. But very often the failures come in because they apply these guidelines to an environment that is not stable yet. And this is sometimes where they have flaws, and this is where they have challenges, is because what we would expect in a normal agricultural context to happen, when we do it in this context, it's slightly different. That's why I always like to refer to specialized agriculture. However, if you understand that environment, it's a lot easier to be able to manage it. And I think that's the importance, is that this rehabilitation should not be one-sided. And, should people be interested in using the land, is that this obviously has to be done together. And this is something that I would really hope to like to see in the future, is that this rehabilitation is done hand in hand with people that are, and farmers that are going to potentially use the land, should they be interested. So there's general land reclamation recommendations. We've seen over the years that the first 5 years, depending on the way it has been structured, and that there's high reclamation inputs, and then eventually by year 5 and 10 there's poor reclamation management, and then the whole progress depletes. So it's a maintenance program that's really important. We know when we use land, if we don't do anything with the land, we will get nothing from the land. The sensitivities and the risks are even higher in the rehab context. So we have to manage land. You can't have a walk-away solution in rehabilitation. That's something that has fortunately changed over the years. So it's important that one understands and lives with that land so that we can make the best of it. So obviously the system is to try and create some more specific guidelines for mining companies. There's a rehabilitation guideline which was recently sort of revised and published through the Land Regeneration Society of Southern Africa, together with Minerals Council, which a lot of these rehabilitation officers use. But it's one set of guidelines. Again, there's no recipe for rehabilitation. There's no recipe for land management, but it's just a guideline. And it's really important that if we can take this system, understand the mine's particular conditions and soils and potentials, then it's easier to make recommendations for him in terms of, should he be planting maize or shouldn't he? Is it economically viable to do maize or not? Because he's not going to achieve the regional average yield. His input costs might be too high. Those kind of things that are going to really determine whether that particular agricultural commodity should be produced in maybe the first 5 years after rehabilitation. Maybe in 10 years' time, the potential is up and running there, you know, for that to happen. But maybe the first 5 years, which is the regenerative phase, maybe the cattle or the livestock enterprise might be the more suitable option to follow until the land is stabilized, because we have to monitor this. So there's a lot of recommendations and considerations that can come from this kind of data once we've run it through phase 3. What different seeding practices could come out of it, vegetation management for their perspective, just to obviously help them and generate some kind of reference document or production guidelines under those particular rehabilitated conditions. All right, enough being said about that, just the information platform. This is what it looks like. There is the website address. You're more than welcome to log in there. Please register. It's interesting for us to be able to know who wants to look at this platform. It gives us an understanding of how to develop this and refine the system. But it's, like I said, it's an Agri information platform. You log on and you basically then just register yourself, and then you'll have access to certain data. Now, there's a couple of data. You won't necessarily see all this data in this platform. You will see public quick navigation. You'll be able to see, you know, sort of how much land, you know, is protected in that area. You'll see, yeah, we've got all the different provinces. It just tells you the rainfall, and these are just obviously rainfall that we've taken. I don't always like an average or a mean rainfall because it does differ at ground level again, but still, it just gives you an understanding of what's going on in that particular environment. Suitable crop types. So when you go and click on, you'll be able to see in those particular provinces what's going on, where's mining, how much land, and this is based on data which we've extracted from both the Department of Minerals and Resources and Department of Agriculture. Put them together, cleaned up the data, and these numbers are going to change as we go over time. This is then further, you can go in there and yeah, you can put on the side of the interactive public map, you will see there's a legend here. There's a couple of things that you can select. The one that I've selected here now is just all the mineral seams in South Africa. You can zoom in. It's an interactive map, so you can zoom into your particular area. You can go and click on where are the salt mines, where are the registered salt mines that according to DMR data. We do know that this data is a little bit outdated at the moment. We actually is trying to showcase this system so that DMR can actually see that this might be a much quicker way for them to update the information. So we really do hope that we're going to get to that point, obviously with the support of Minerals Council but we're going to show what this platform can do. So you can select what you want to see. Yeah, what I've done now is I've gone and selected, I think, crop suitability in particular areas. And overlaying, you can see there's little grey dots there. This is the mining area. And I know it doesn't look as much as we feel that it is, but when you start zooming in, the picture obviously becomes a little bit more what we are experiencing and what we are seeing in the landscape. So here again, you can see there's the crop suitability for maize that you can see for the particular area. You can see, obviously, the mining is taking place straight slam bam in the middle of it. And obviously, when you zoom in there, you'll be able to get a little bit more data. Now, this is, again, sort of a spatial view. It's overarching. It doesn't give you detail, but it does just show you, the sort of impacts of these two different environments. This is typical of the landscape. When we look at it from an aerial point of view, we obviously see a lot of the scarred landscape. And obviously, when we start overlaying the data, we can actually see the mining areas that are, obviously the land that is being owned. As we then select the different layers, we can then see when we add crop suitability, we can see, is this rehabilitation when this land starts to being rehabilitated, does it fit into the regional norm of suitability of a particular crop? This was just maize at this point. Like I say, coming back to my blueberry example, my goodness, I've seen them trying to plant blueberries or bamboo in places where this will never grow. And it's just really important that this kind of investment is not, sort of wasted, because we know what the potential are of these particular areas. This is now obviously executive data at a much lower level. a much higher level that the public not necessarily going to access. But just to give you a little bit example of what is out there, what we're looking at. So we've got all the different provinces. You can go and click which province. We've got the district municipalities, the local municipalities. We've got the mining group's name, and we also got the particular mine's name. So we can go and select that. And then when we do select that, it obviously generates the data that is collected for that particular area. We can see how much mine land is owned, how much is active, how much is rehabilitated, how much is closed. We're going to refine this a little bit because rehabilitated is a term that is very widely used. For some mines, rehabilitated means just the amount of soil that's been placed and it's leveled. Other people talk about revegetated is their level of rehabilitation. So there's a lot of this terminology disconnect, which we're trying to refine. And believe you me, it's not always easy to get this terminology right. So everybody talks about these things loosely. But at the end of the day, we want to understand that if a thing is rehabilitated, does it still have to be revegetated, or is it revegetated? We want to know how old the revegetation is. We want to be able to know eventually, and that's some data that we're collecting, and I'll share that just a case study with you now, is what is the grazing potential, for instance, of this rehabilitated land? Because most of this land, I'm talking specifically now of the surface coal mining, platinum mines, those large surface mining areas, they revegetated to a pasture mixture initially, okay? And that is why it's so concerning for us to be able to know what the grazing capacity is, because we see the value of an animal factor. But there are also other areas that have other potential that we obviously have to capture as well. So this is the kind of data. It tells you what the land cover is. It tells you the land capability, moderate to high, very low for that particular area, depending on what you select. Like I say, you can select the province you want. You can select the local municipality. You can go and select. This is now being done for the entire country. We're still uploading data as we go along. We haven't got all the mines, obviously not all the mines have participated. And what's happening now is that because we're showcasing this and showing the value to the big mine players, they're really seeing the value of it. And at the same time, Minerals Council is obviously saying to their members, this is a platform that is being developed for both the mining sector as well as the agricultural sector to be able to get context, better context than what we have, and hopefully even better as we go along in time. It's a huge task, I can tell you that now. It's not easy, but I think we're getting there. And like I said, I don't think this project will ever end. It'll be a waste. But nevertheless, you can be able to see, sort of what land has been rehabilitated, for instance, what is agricultural potential, what is grassland potential, where's there still mining taking place. So there's a lot of benchmarking of data that is also occurring. You can go and look at crop suitability on that particular mine that's been rehabilitated, maybe, or that area. You're able to see what's a suitable and unsuitable crop. This is obviously to inform, the particular mining rehabilitation or mine closure rehabilitation specialists. So eventually, at the end of the day, there's a lot of data. There's a lot that needs to be known. There's a lot of challenges. This is definitely not going to solve all the problems, but it is going to give us a slightly better understanding of whether we should be focusing rather on this particular land use in the first 5 years, and maybe then reevaluate, because they're always going to have to reevaluate if they've made progress in sort of revegetation or rehabilitation progress, until they eventually receive mine closure. At the end of the day, which I don't think many of them are going to get easily, but there's a couple of very good case studies where I can tell you now that I would take that land and use it gladly, which, from my own experience, I've already done that. But let's maybe just look at a case study, because I get excited about it, and I don't think we always have the opportunity to show the agricultural sector what potential there is. I'm not saying it all looks like this anywhere. It's not all over the case. There's many problems. There's a lot of mining, a lot of prospecting impacts. A lot of these issues do occur. And understanding the impact of that particular impact is also important and crucial, and we need to understand it. But should we have the opportunity to be able to utilize this land again, what are we letting ourselves in for? What is the potential? Is there maybe opportunity to coexist, in the sense, maybe be more actively involved in the rehabilitation or the maintenance or the land use at the cost of the mining company. You know, the mining company has got a liability they have to manage. So, you know, there might be opportunity there. And I've seen that time and again. When you know, the way I've grazed rehabilitated land, and I've shown that the land has improved and has actually remained stable, it just makes it more valuable to them, because their liability is not even becoming more, it's becoming less. So when you look at a typical case study, you look at this completely mixed up environment, soils are mixed. Eventually, at the end of the day, you know, these soils are placed on some of this under, you know, this mined material, and then they seed it with pastures, and they seed it very often with my predecessor, my professor, was very involved in selecting the species mixture, and it was done based on very important scientific principles of combining the right species. But they are very productive species and have a lot of potential, especially the way they're being fertilized, and the mines are not using it, and there's a lot of opportunity. This is just one case study. So we did a research study just recently now, over 4 years, where we said to the guys, you know, let's try and use this land like we typically use regenerative agriculture. We brought in a little bit of cover crop rotation. We planted the mixtures. Some parts, there's just one study here where we utilized oats, for instance, and then we divided the area up into camps, and then we obviously do constant monitoring of the soil. And then we went and applied 3 different stocking rates, because we also know the value of ultra high density grazing at certain times of the year in certain environments. Just being very specific about that, it doesn't work all over the place. And the right way is applied is important. But we wanted to see what can we actually achieve. We brought the animals, and believe you me, it's not easy doing research on a mine. It's probably one of the most restrictive research environments because of all the health and safety regulations. But nevertheless, we did this. We applied these different rates. We were getting some really interesting results. You know, soil compaction is probably one of the bigger problems that you find in surface mine rehabilitation. But we did see, with nice, good vegetation covers, the roots were doing some phenomenal work, alleviating some of the compaction. We saw that production, you know, looking at these yields, we were getting yields of nearly close to 18 tons of dry matter per hectare. And a lot of people say that's impossible, and I can tell you now it is possible when you look at the fertilizer budgets, if you manage it correctly, cut correctly at the right time. So we were really getting some really exciting stuff. And these would obviously differing under the pressures of grazing. Again, don't want to go into the detail. I just want to show you one example of work that is being done. We saw the quality of vegetation really high from an animal perspective. We also do a lot of forage quality testing, because if animals are ever going to utilize this material, we're going to be sure that there's no nasty elements in it. So these are things that obviously become a lot more rigorous to monitor in a rehabilitated space, but the opportunity is there. And if you find the value there, why not harness it and use it? So that was just quickly, Janse. I don't know, I felt like I've run through this presentation. There's a lot that I can say. I can speak a whole day. An hour is never enough. But really, if there's any questions, I'm willing to take them and maybe, yeah, answer a couple of things. Thanks, Janse.
Wayne, thank you so much for that information. You've exceeded yourself with a project. I think there's a lot to be done, and obviously the value of this project is that it informs all of us in our negotiations, in our relationships with mining companies, with government, with other farmers, and most valuable to have that data-driven information in place. We have a couple of minutes or 10 minutes or so for a question or two. Wayne, I'd like to kick off with one question. Jack, I see your hand. I want to ask the broad question right away. In your view, and I'd be amiss if I don't use the opportunity to ask you this, does mining, including gas production or exploration, as we hear the news about that, does it pose a risk to food security in South Africa right now?
My initial answer, yes, because I think we're losing a lot of land. I think we're also having impacts on water quality. So yes, I do think there is a threat. and there is a risk it is posing on it. I think unless we can offset the land that we're losing to mining and sort of expand other agricultural areas, I think if we don't do that at the same rate as what we're losing land to mining, we are at a huge risk. So there's no doubt about it. I think just under the normal climate change issues, we sort of know the risks there. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, there's a risk.
Thanks, Wayne. I don't see hands yet. Please use the facility on your laptop to ask that. Jack Armour from Free State Agriculture. I see your hand. Jack, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Wayne, and thanks, Janse, for organising. I think, Janse, you asked the first question on my list over here. It's the big unknown. That's underground mining. Prof. Truter, you focused very much on the surface stuff and the rehabilitating the surface, but these gas minings where they drill boreholes and you don't know what's happening underneath the ground. The impact that can have on your land. And I think that's the big question at the moment of what farmers sort of want to know. And also the focus very much was on rehabilitation after the mining. But I think what a lot of farmers also want to know, and maybe your system can sort of give a good indication of that, is for them to make an informed decision when a prospector comes onto their land and they get a mining right and they start mining. What will that type of mining look like in the future? Like the mining companies tell you, no, it's just gas mining. It's just a small hole they're going to make, and maybe 10 meters by 10 meters that they're going to fence off, and that's that. But then they drill another hole and another hole, and all the pipes connecting them, and eventually you can't farm there. So that's the one need of our members at the moment. The other important thing, and you touched on that, initially you focused on land and the impact on land, but the impact of water is so crucial as well. And all this exposed rock that gets stunned, and then when it's covered up again, it's breaking down faster and releasing minerals, and that's all going into the groundwater. I think that's important to monitor and how to manage that. And then also the Institute for Groundwater Studies at the University of the Free State has been doing
Jack, if you can hear me, from my side, we seem to have lost you. Wayne, can you hear Jack?
No, I can't hear Jack. Sorry, I also was getting concerned it was me.
While we wait for Jack, I think a lot of what we're concerned about too is this particular relationship between mining companies and farmers. And the question that I very often ask, and Wayne, we're going to leave this for another question time later on too, is but ponder this thought. If we can get Jack back, we'll give him the chance to finalize his question. But this question about whether the playing field between the mining company and a landowner is a fair or level playing field. That's a general question, but one that I think many of our farmers and our affiliated members struggle with. And it does seem as if there's an enormous advantage, or they're in a much stronger position, I suppose, when a mining company comes to your land and what is a farmer then to do? Do you agree with that statement that the playing field is not necessarily always level?
Yes, I think so. I think Jack raised the important point is that whatever the particular mining operation is, I don't think it's always quite clear from the onset that what is the difference between initial prospecting and the eventual full-scale mining activity impact. And I think that again is also information that is very often not easily, well, I don't know if it's not disclosed, but I don't think it's easily presented, because very often mining activities is very often driven by commodity price and how much more they're going to mine and so the rate of mining and the speed of mining and the cumulative impact, I think, as Jack's referred to, especially looking at this gas mining exploration and all that, when you start linking all the surface impacts, it becomes a huge hindrance, and it just makes the whole normal land function not sustainable or not even possible to do anything else and to coexist. So I agree with you there. I think, I don't think landowners are fully aware of what the mining process is going to entail. I think it's sort of sold as, oh, we're just prospecting a little area just to try and see, but we don't know what the full scale potential is, and I think that's a problem.
Thanks, Wayne. Colleagues on the call, I do have opportunity for one more question before we start closing off. I see that we've certainly underestimated the time that we could talk about that. Are there any takers for a last question to Wayne? Agri Northern Cape, I see a hand there. I don't know who it is. I have a thought, but if you could introduce yourself and just ask the question.
Good morning, Janse. Good morning, Professor. It's Eben Antonissen. I had some connectivity issues here. I'd like to keep my question nice and short. It's very good with rehabilitation and a lot of work that goes into the whole process of rehabilitating a mining area. My question lies with the old order right mining companies where agricultural land or the mining land was rehabilitated to a certain extent, but a lot of these mining companies don't even exist anymore, and some of these mining areas are not rehabilitated. That's a serious question. A lot of these farms are being owned by mining companies, and there's no intention of rehabilitating those properties, and that's the reality that we sit within the Northern Cape. And connected with that is especially the diamond mining companies and the small areas where diamonds are being extracted. That's not rehabilitated, and I think it's something that we can look into in the future. But it's a serious problem in the Northern Cape. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Eben. You're 100% correct. These legacy mines, and it's always been a challenge that some of these older mines just have disappeared off the face of the earth, and then they become these ownerless and derelict mines, and there's many of them in the country. I think not just looking, I think it's over 6,000 of them now in the country, but it is a problem. And but whoever owns that land, and if there's an opportunity to establish who that is still, because somewhere along the line the land is still registered to somebody, it has to be followed up. How much following up is being done, I'm not sure. I don't think we have enough capacity to sort of enforce and follow up as we would like. But that land is, and the longer we leave it, the more it's going to cost, and the question is who's going to do it. And obviously the government is responsible to some extent, but this is just, you're raising a point that is being discussed for many years now, and it still remains an issue. And I don't know if there is opportunity, and we know there's a rehabilitation fund and all these kind of things, but unless we don't in some way put pressure on this particular aspect, I don't think we're going to get any light out of it. So yeah, and talk about these little diamond mining operations. I was in the Northwest a couple of years ago, and it looks like a couple of mole heaps all over the place. The land functionality is completely destroyed. What do you do with that? It's a huge problem. And I think once we can start, and I don't know whose responsibility that's going to be, but once we can actually show that this unrehabilitated land, what's its impact on food security that we've lost, maybe that's one way we can motivate and put pressure on. And especially when the food prices start to rise, we can say, well, this is maybe one of the reasons over and above anything else. But yeah, it still remains a challenging question, and so we can only, and this is what we're hoping with this kind of platform, is that if we can start documenting this stuff and making it visible on a spatial view, somebody's going to start feeling ashamed, and start saying, oh, we got a problem here. And we're hoping that this is going to be the case.
Wayne, thank you so much for your time this morning. Colleagues, this will be the first of a number of interactions that we'll be having on the topic. There are major questions that need to be asked, and you'll have seen in recent email correspondence from Agri SA that Agri SA is taking this issue seriously. You'll have seen the documentation we've supplied about the relationship between prospecting right holders and landowners, the draft agreement that we're doing, the litigation that we're embarking upon as an example of what the challenges are between mining and agriculture in a specific administrative law context. You'll in very near future see the public hearings on the preservation and development of agricultural land bill as it is now, which Agri SA will be participating in. We'll also have Professor Truter at Agri SA's Congress in about 2 weeks' time from now. Please make use of the opportunity to introduce yourself. This is a repository of information and knowledge that I think is unmatched in South Africa, I think I can fairly say. We have a number of questions that still are outstanding, so I've mentioned some of them. We need to talk about the future of coal. We need to mention governance failures, especially with respect to what is being mined by whom, where in a mining cadastre, which has been in the media for years now, absence context. We need to talk about governance shortcomings, and we need to also refine our respective positions on the topic and how we engage with one another, with governments and with mining companies on that. In that regard, Agri SA will also be convening a group of specialists, and we hope to have Professor Truter there as well, to sharpen our pencils on how Agri SA as an organization needs to respond to the challenges with respect to mining as well as gas, which we're extremely concerned about. We look forward to filling the space a bit more. We'll be having, as I said, regular interactions, webinars and events on the topic. We need to inform ourselves first and foremost, and I think, Wayne, thank you so much for the information, the work you've been doing over a number of years on the MinAgri platform. I'll ask Wayne very kindly if we could share the presentation that he's given this morning, and obviously he's given you the link, or you'll have seen in the chat box the link to the electronic platform as it is at the moment. With that, I'm going to close the meeting. Wayne, once again, thank you so much from all of us participating this morning. Also know that this is a representative group of organizations mostly this morning. This that you've said to us this morning will be circulated widely, and I think we're going to see significant interest in the matter coming forward. Once again, thank you for your time, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for engaging with agriculture in the manner in which you do. With that, colleagues, I'm going to close the webinar and see you again soon.